I'll talk to you about this presentation is based on two articles I wrote on reflective functioning and reactive attachment disorder. The articles were published in a French journal last year, La Psychiatrie de l'Enfant. So I also made a translation of the articles. I brought just a few copies, but Sol is going to make them available, I think, through internet or something. So I have to say, first of all, it's an honor to present after Professor Fonagy, and also a bit of pressure because so much of what I have to say is based on his work. And so I'll try to quote him as exactly as possible. But okay, so yeah. When I studied here in 2006, I also trained to score the parent developmental interview to score for reflective functioning. So I think some of you might also have done that. That's what I wanted to use for my doctoral thesis, actually. And the sample we could find was mothers of attachment disordered children. That's why we went to into that topic. Yeah, so I guess most of you are familiar with what reactive attachment disorder is, so I'll just skim over this quickly. The most important thing, I think, was there used to be two subtypes of RAD, but yeah, the inhibited and disinhibited types. But now in the new DSM, they have been made into two separate diagnoses. So I think it's unfortunate because what we mostly see in practice is mixed symptoms. So now that they are completely separate, I don't know if there will be like too much overlap or how it'll turn out. Also, they put it in the trauma-related category, which is also a bit weird because many authors have said that it was possible to make the diagnosis in a reliable way without clear evidence of neglect or trauma. So that's also a problem, I think. Next, yeah, about that, I'll just say that it's sometimes possible to confuse reactive attachment disorder with disorganized attachment. It's a bit different because, as I understand it, in disorganized attachment, well, first of all, they overlap quite a bit, but they come from two different paradigms. So the difference is that, yeah, like as I understand it, in disorganized attachment, children do have bits of attachment models. It's just that they are fragmented and not integrated. Whereas in the RAD, it is said to be more of a non-attachment disorder. So where the child did not experience a clearly more important relationship. So maybe it's a bit like Professor Fonagy talked about earlier. They have sort of maybe their mistrust would be so high that they haven't developed any attachment model. Yeah. And also, I have to say, it's not that they didn't have a caregiving relationship that was more important. It's just that they couldn't experience it for whatever internal or external reason also. Yeah. So, how does yeah, parental reflective functioning come into that? Actually, Mary Ainsworth came up with the concept of maternal sensitivity to explain the transmission of attachment, and but it was later proven to have sort of a small effect on the variance in a meta-analysis by Van Eysendorn. And later, Arietta Slade showed that parental reflective functioning had a greater impact of, say, a moderate effect size. So it was sort of a better predictor, I guess. And but why? So why is it a better predictor? Yeah, if the parent is able to perceive the child in the child's mental state and reflect it in a non-threatening way, it helps the child to regulate his internal state and lower his anxiety, and develop a sense of security. It also helps the child to become aware of his mental state, because say the child felt something and then it was dealt with in an appropriate manner. So that's the maternal sensitivity part, but also there was meaning that was made out of it, and hopefully this information was integrated in a model in the child's mind. Yeah. So we can say that reflective functioning and parental reflective functioning makes the world more understandable for the child, and it doesn't necessarily change the world, it just organizes his perception of it, and both inner world and outer world also. Okay, I just want to mention two factors in the child that help develop reflective functioning and also security in the relationship. It's the impression of stability and predictability and in the caregiving relationship, and also the perception of contingency. So why do I use the word impression? It's a bit like I said earlier. It's because the world could be like stable as a clock, but one given child may not be able to understand it because his mental equipment doesn't allow him to, for whatever innate or developmental reasons. And the opposite is also true, like some children do develop adequate RF even though they seem to live in a chaotic environment, maybe because they are better equipped, or maybe they have different protective factors, who knows. But yeah, the same goes for contingency. So contingency is the degree to which, what is it? Yeah. It's the degree to which sorry, I want to get this right. Yeah, it's so how much reality corresponds to what the child has in his mind. So that's contingency. And maybe I want to give an example to illustrate this. Say if I go to the restaurant with an Italian friend and we can both order spaghetti, but instead we get linguine. So I might be like, okay, that's close enough, so I can eat it, it's fine. But to my Italian friend, there might be a world of difference. So he's like gonna go, what is this? And so because of his hypersensitivity to pasta, so this will become an obstacle to development of a balanced and flexible RF to him, that's free of anxiety. So maybe you won't eat it, maybe you won't go to the restaurant anymore. So just because of our predisposition to the same situation. Okay, and actually, to me, a secure attachment is the feeling of security in the exploration and elaboration of one's own internal model. So it's sort of a secure relationship to one's own mental states that you can explore and elaborate. Yeah, okay. So yeah, growing up, you don't want to have excessive contingency, because I call it catastrophical reflection. I don't know if it's a word or not. Because if there's excessive contingency, it gives a reality value to the mental state, and it can be quite distressing for the child. I'll come back to that a bit later. Then there's also such a thing as not enough contingency, like a detached reflection. So that's not good, because mental states then lose their truth value to the child. The distinction between reality and truth is something I try to elaborate as, yeah, it's something can be true to me, but it doesn't mean it's a reality. Like I might think it's quite a warm day today, and someone else might think it's cold. So we have two different truths. But if that person tries to convince me that it's actually really cold, it goes against what I think. So I might, like over a long period of time, I might lose track of what I feel, like even like my mental state lose its truth value, so I don't know what I feel inside. So I don't know if that's confusing or anyways. Okay. Sorry. So when we look at reflective functioning, it's not real enough to see if it's good or bad reflective functioning. We want to be able to describe it. So luckily, some people have done that for us already by describing the pre-mentalizing mode of functioning. I don't know, yeah, maybe by raising hand or something, who is familiar with this model of equivalent thought and pretend thought? So I see Mr. Fanegi is familiar with it. That's good. And should I, like, who is familiar with that? So not many people, I think.
Why don't you take us through it?
Okay, sure. So in the equivalent mode, it's thought to be present from birth or shortly close after, and because of lack of experience, the baby or the person takes this mental state for a reality, and vice versa also. A well-known example of this was brought to attention by Winnicott when he was saying that, say the baby wants to be fed and then he's actually fed, so he can't believe that his thinking is actually a reality. So that's the equivalent mode. And then later, with the beginning of symbolic thought and maybe in a primitive form from 1 year, but probably older, like 2 years old, the pretend mode, this should be a D here. The pretend mode is, it allows for a better dealing in a better way with impulsions and anxiety, and I'll come back to like a more detailed description of that. But yeah. So the most important thing I think here is that even though this is a developmental model and the child is believed to go through these stages before they become more integrated and flexible, it's possible to become more fixated in one of these two modes, or as an adult to regress to one of these in times of stress or for instance. Yeah, so I'll have the chance to make a clearer description later. I just want to say a bit about the boring part of the research, the methods. So what I did was take 7 participants, was sort of a small sample, so it's really a preliminary study that we did. We administered the parent development interview. It's about like, it's a just to summarize what it is, a semi-structured interview, and is thought to arouse the attachment representation of the parents, much like the adult attachment interview. It was not developed originally for scoring reflective functioning, but I think it's used mostly that way now because of a scoring system developed by Arietta Slade, which is a bit more quantitative. So through reading the transcript of the interview, you can come to a score of, say, -1 to 9 if the reflective functioning is really good or bad. But what I wanted to do was develop a new grid that would be sort of a complement to Slade's scoring system that would not only determine the level of reflective functioning, but also determine what we could call a reflective style. So something that would be maybe more descriptive. So I just surveyed the literature to find examples of what could be manifestation of the pre-mentalizing modes of functioning. And I tried to give a precise description of them so it's possible to score them in the PDI. There are 16 types of manifestation, but this can change as we validate the instrument. And to me it helps determine the predominant mode of functioning of the parent, of course. Okay. This it's called the reflective function developmental quality evaluation. It's a bit. I'm not sure I like that name. I want to change it to something more fun. If there are any ideas later, you can tell me. It's quite straightforward. It's just like split in two. The first part is about the equivalent mode, and then the first category is the accessibility of mental states. So some parents are under the impression that the kid's mental state is readily available to them. So this is actually called projection. Like you don't really know what the person is thinking, but you just assume that she's thinking that way. So actually, it's projection, but that's not accurate or realistic, because all reflective functioning is actually involves a part of projection, but just a projection that's more accurate and based on realistic cues. Also, so the child's mental state may seem accessible to the parent, but also some parents feel that their own mental state is accessible to their child without even saying anything. So I have an example. One mother said to me, when I wasn't doing well, my son would know it right away. We weren't seeing each other at the time, of course, but I think he knew anyway. So that's real. She really had the impression that there was a connection there. Also, some parents assume that the interviewer understands everything that there is to know about them. We also get that a lot in therapy, I think. The next sort of category is self-other confusion. This is also equivalence of thought, but at a level that often seems more psychotic. Say one mother said to me, I want to read from this example. So one mother said to me, at home we're 4. I have 4 children. So it's just a really small detail in how she expressed herself, that we get the feeling that she's actually identity confused with the children. Mental state contagion or catastrophic reflection. I don't know if one can say that in English, but it's so sometimes the child mental state becomes the parent's mental state. Like a mother said to me, I find it really hard when my daughter cries. I also cry because I can feel her sadness. So then it all gets mixed up, and this is actually like I was saying before, an excess of contingency, which is really distressing to the child, because it's like when the baby has this feeling of omnipotence that's supposed to go away as you grow up. The reality value of mental state is we often see that in anxiety disorder, like phobias or obsessive compulsive disorders. It's like if I think about something, it becomes real, or the possibility that it'll actually occur becomes higher. This is what I termed it. But one mother said to me, coming back from she took her daughter to school, and then on the way back she said, I really had the impression that something bad was going to happen to her, so I had to go back to look on her. So just because the thought has occurred, it makes it more real, and also makes it more rigid, because then the parent really has difficulty changing point of view even in front of new information, because the thought itself is experienced as a concrete fact. Okay. And I also included theological interpretation in there, although I know it sometimes is considered as a third mode of pre-mentalizing functioning, but I thought it was more efficient to include it there because it has more to do with equivalence to me. This is like it means that if you see something, it must be true. Yeah. This happens a little later in the child. You see that when they start to understand what an intention is and they ascribe intention to everything. Like if they trip on a toy, then it's going to be the toy's fault because the toy did it on purpose. So also we do that as adults, like somebody bump into you on the tube and you think they did it on purpose, not because there's a million people there. So yeah. Am I?
Take another.
Okay. So the second part of the grid is so about the pretend mode. One manifestation of it is the lack of consequences of mental state. So, oh yeah, I just want to say, like I said, in this type of thinking, we have to understand that mental states are felt as neither true nor real. And these are not my words, of course, but it's a very apt formulation. So this is useful for the kids because as a kid you can just explore different scenarios without being anxious about the consequences of it. So you can just pretend to shoot someone and it doesn't matter because it's not real, it's just a game. So this is really important for development. But someone that goes on functioning just in that type of thinking, it becomes really hard for that person to know what's going on inside of them because they don't know if it's true or not. And also they have trouble recognizing that their mental state has an impact on anything. So yeah, the lack of consequence of mental state, say they can realize that the child is happy, but they don't really know what it does to them, or the opposite, yeah, on the self or on others, like the parent really feel angry and is able to recognize it, but they don't really see what impact it has on the child. Also, because the ideas are not really felt as being true, you can see contradictions in speech. So sometimes that's funny, sometimes that's disturbing to hear also. Okay. Yeah, I have an example of that, actually. So one mother said to me, "I do everything like my mother." Well, not really. I'm really different from her. So in the same sentence, like she goes from, so this is, so yeah, you can't help but smile at that. But, and then another participant said, she described to me the abuse by her father. And on the next question, like a minute later, she said, "My parents never hurt me. Well, maybe my mother a little, but my father never." So this is very sad, actually, and you see that the existence of these contradictions are necessary to protect the person, and it's not something that you want to point out too quickly or before much work has been done. Also, like I said, the pretend mode to me is in big part used as a defense against anxiety. So I included defense mechanisms in there also. It's a bit more difficult to score in the transcript. So there was I tried to give as precise a definition and a description of it. In dissociative state, as I understand it, is when the parent feels cut off or alienated from the child. It's a bit like the absence of consequences, but it's more in as a defensive lack of empathy rather than not perceiving the impact. In negation, say negation. This means to express a mental state and then disavow it right away. Like, so most people, I guess, are familiar with these, but one mother said to me, say, "I don't mind talking about my grandparents. It doesn't make me sad. It's okay." So at the same time, we know that it sort of makes her sad because she took the trouble to say it. It's just that she's not ready to own it. But it sometimes is a good sign, like the affect has become more conscious. It's just that it's going to take time to integrate it. Denial is more or less severe disturbance of reality testing, as you know, or it can be also a more or less conscious attempt to convince oneself that things happen in a certain way. And projective identification, of course, I think is the most tricky to score, but as understand it, it's the parent has trouble knowing how he feels because it's a symptom of pretend functioning. So he induces a behavior in the child in order to put it into action outside of himself. So an example of that would be someone said, my son wants more freedom now, so I let him go. He fell down on his face, and so he's going to realize he still needs me. So the mother is actually describing how her own dependency needs and how she just let it unfold. And also I just want to mention that we all use these to a certain extent when we speak or think, and I think it's a matter of how much, like during the length of the interview, some parents had, say, 20 or 30 examples of these, so this is not a normal amount, I think. Just quickly, the results that we got. There was a really high correlation between the parental reflective functioning scoring, the typical system we use, and the grid that we use. The correlation was of minus 0.89, so it's almost perfect. It's reversed because, of course, the higher the reflective functioning, the less of pre-mentalizing modes we use, so obviously. But I don't think it's a redundant measure because it gives us a different type of information, namely why RF is low, for instance. In our sample, some subjects were clearly in one mode more than the other, and some were, say, had examples of both modes, but in different parts of the interview. Say, when talking about their child, they could be more in the equivalent mode, and when talking about their parent, they could be more in the pretend mode. So that's also interesting to see that it can vary depending on the topic. Okay. I think it has also a clinical usefulness because if you can determine the person's main reflective style, you can really adjust your intervention to them also. Say if you notice that the parent has boundary confusion or is clearly detached, that's what you want to address. Of course, do you really need this grid to come to that conclusion? Maybe not. Because that's just clinical work actually, but it becomes more objective that way. You can measure it, and you can measure also the efficiency of the interventions. And one other point is that, say, for one mother, there were at first I really thought she was functioning in an equivalent mode because the examples were so blatant, but when scoring in detail, I realized that there were also many examples of pretend mode, so it helps to really pay attention to small details in the speech. This is one thing that I could not explore very much, but there is the link between the pre-mentalizing modes of functioning and certain personality disorders and psychopathology. It's been some things have already been said about that, but I think it would be interesting to use the scoring grid and to make the relationship between the two. So actually, attachment disorders, I don't have much to say about that because I could not have access to the child symptomatology. But this is another step that I would want to do, is really try to score the child's symptoms and make a relationship with the parent mode of functioning. Mm-hmm. So that's the examples. And then for me, it's just like a preliminary study. As I said, it's not the end. I have to do some more research about this with a bigger sample and hopefully maybe come back to present the results another day.